Nick Farr-Jones, it's good to talk to you in this series, and especially in relation to this great, huge word, success. Now, not to embarrass you, but let's talk about you. You're a much-loved member of the famous Australian Wallabies rugby union team who lifted trophies and knew what it was to be winners. Selected for the national touring team in 1984, must have been young. Made captain just 4 years later. Member of the Order of Australia. Inducted the list goes on. And in the 90s, you were a golden decade, really. Member of Australia's Holy Trinity of Campese, Liner and yourself. Success has been very much a part of your life. I wonder if I was to ask you, what about the mates at school that you went to school with and they've watched you? What would they think of all that?
Yeah, I think probably they would have been surprised, Keith, because it didn't happen naturally. I mean, I grew up with two brothers. I look at my 4 children on those compulsory laptop computers we have to buy at the age of 12, and they spend 3 and 4 hours on those things these days. It drives you nuts. But for me, growing up in the south of Sydney in that quarter of an acre of backyard, it was running into my brother's under the hills hoist. I played a million sports. It made me very competitive. I wanted to win. You know, you need that ingredient, I think, to bubble to the surface in sport, as I was lucky enough to do. But at school, it's well documented that for someone who was fortunate enough to go on and play 10 years with the Wallabies, as you said, to captain the team for half that period, to be part of winning World Cups. I mean, a lot of people talk about the fact I didn't play first 15. I didn't make my school's first team. So I think when you ask me what's it like for your mates to then see you on this transition to pulling on your nation's jersey, you know, being a part of those great tours and playing on some of the biggest stages of the world. I mean, I'm sure it came as somewhat of a shock. They knew I could play sport. They knew I was competitive. What they probably didn't see was the blood, sweat and tears, the hard work that I put into to get to that sort of stage.
Now, as we pick up on the theme of sorrow, I'm very pleased to have a special conversation with Lee Hatcher. Now, Lee's been involved in media over many years. He regularly presents on Sky. And in the Christian world, he's the host of Open House on 103.2 here in Sydney. But it goes across all of Australia. And Lee, it's great to have you talking about this. How often is sorrow an integral part of the kind of things people would ask when they call in, or the conversations would you have?
It's surprising, especially at night time, because it's a nighttime show, how much people's minds are brought to their sorrows and their problems of life. It's not to say that it's a universal condition of every caller, but there is something about the night, I think, that that casts that shadow over the difficulties that we have, that people feel more free. And especially because it's a program called Open House, and because it's uniquely radio, because you've got that personal connection, people feel able to share that.
I mean, there's lots of words that come to my mind. I wrote words like trauma, tragedy, depression, grief. When you hear the word sorrow, what do you think comes to most people's minds?
Oh, just probably a heavy blanket, I think. Sometimes that takes the form of depression or just a certain melancholy that stays with them. Sometimes it's the glass half empty person who will almost conditionally see something in a negative rather than the glass half full person as a positive.
Now, we've talked before on set and off set about the fact that many Christians find this a whole difficult area to handle because of, perhaps, can we say, the handed down perception and theology. Can we talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I think the theological question is a very acute one, because it's I think a really helpful thing to acknowledge that sorrow is a part of life, that it is not necessarily your fault. There is a flawed theology that says when sorrow or difficulty or illness, for instance, hits, well, it might be your problem. It might be a result of unconfessed sin. I've experienced that. I had a period of illness in my life, and it was really shocking to me how flawed that theology was. But it's also flawed in that it excludes God.
Tanya Plibersek, it's good to talk to you, particularly about society, because this is such an important area. Now, today we hear a lot about community. Do you think we've lost a concept of society? Are they the same thing, or are some people avoiding something when they say that?
Well, I think community can mean people, just those people in your neighbourhood, people very close to you. And society to me is something bigger and broader, and it involves the way that we organise ourselves as a nation. So it does include, of course, decisions that governments make, decisions business make, the way that we look after each other in our country.
You've been in politics now a few years, and if there's elections that come along, you've been fighting election for, how many will it be now?
I think this will be my 6th.
Yeah, fantastic. A young woman considering a place in politics, you were conscious about the theory of society. It was important to you. What does it mean to you now? Now you've been in politics for all these years.
Well, it's just as important to me now. I think that the decisions that we make as individuals about the way that we behave are very important. They're very important moral questions. But there's something that underlays that. If we fail one another as individuals, we need to know that there's I suppose, a net that will catch the people who fall through those failures of our individual care for one another. And so I think that having a government that supports caring for our most disadvantaged, that's the most critical thing in developing the sort of society that I want to be part of.
Social justice has always been important to you. It's been a priority. You've let it flow, I think, through your different portfolios. What do you think about social justice as the most important aspect to you? What really drives you about it?
It's a very difficult question to answer. I think that one of the most fundamental driving forces of all of the decisions that I make, right at the base of that is how do we make things better with each decision?
Margaret Somerville, it's a delight to talk to you, particularly somebody who's lived a very long and profitable life in the service of God. And while we're thinking about spirituality and faith, I wonder if you can look back on your life and if there are some things about your journey of life that have been particularly important in terms of faith.
I suppose I've grown more as I've got older. There was one experience I had not long after going back to Croker, where I evidently was at a bit of a low ebb and wondered just what was happening to me when we had a dentist come out from Darwin to do the children's teeth. He was a very strong Christian, and it irked me. You know how when you're not feeling it on top of yourself, and I knew that it was wrong, and I knew I must get back to my having my normal morning quiet time. I got out of the habit in the business of just settling in after we'd got back from Otford. And I was reading Romans and just decided I'd read Romans. And it said, I'm not ashamed of the gospel of God, of Christ, for it's the power of God unto salvation. And I cried out to God and I just said, Lord, please forgive me for my lack of faith and give me a power in my life like John's got. And God answered my prayer, and it gave me an experience of him that I've never forgotten, and it has been the most important experience of my life.